What's up, Internet? You're tuning to episode 56 of the Steam Deck Podcast, Flip Screen Games' weekly gaming podcast, all about Valve's portable PC powerhouse, the Steam Deck. I'm your host, Peter Messi, joined as always by my very good friend and co-host, the finest mind in the Steam Deck community, making his grand return to the show, Mr. Steven Radford.
Hello, hello.
Hello, Steve. Good to have you back.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, for filling in for me. It was, a bad episode for me to miss. I was really excited about
It
that
really
news.
was. It really
Yeah.
was a bad episode for you to miss. I was going to say it was, Chris did a great job holding down the fort. Of course, I think we had a really great discussion last week. But yeah, we definitely missed you. And I took the DMs that you and I had about the news story the night before, and I was trying to weave your comments in. So it's like, I'm sure the people want to hear what you think about it, right? So, but
Yeah.
the nice thing is, Steve, this week we have a little bit of a follow up on last week's story. So we'll get to pepper your thoughts in a little bit, I think, here and there.
Mm.
So that's
Yeah,
pretty good.
the story has progressed. What do they call it? An emerging story? It's still
Yeah.
ongoing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's actively breaking, right?
I actually thought we might have seen something this week because it was the 20th anniversary of Steam. I thought maybe they do some news. Instead, we just got a big sale. PSA, if anyone listening to this still doesn't have a Steam Deck, it's on sale at the moment, up to 20% off, I think,
Yeah, it's pretty good.
to
It's a pretty
celebrate
good
the
pretty deep
set the
discounts.
20 years.
Yeah, if you're getting the most expensive model, it's up to it's 20% off. The 64 gig is 10%, and the middle model, which is the one that we recommend to like most people, is 15% off. So I mean, in the States, you're looking at $449.65. So I mean, getting it for under $500 is a pretty sweet deal. You're saving like $50. So yeah, if you're one of those people who are listening to the show because you want a Steam Deck but you haven't gotten one yet, I would say this is a pretty good time to bite if you know, you're not feeling waiting for Black Friday and maybe a deeper discount down the road. But
I don't think we've seen a bigger discount than 20%, have we? I think this is pretty much on par with what they've always done, 10,
correct me
15,
if
and
I'm wrong
20.
though. During the last big sale, because it wasn't Black Friday, it was the summer sale. Wasn't it 20% across the board? Like every model was
No,
that
I
much
don't
off?
think so. It's
Oh, okay.
20% across. I think it's 20% across the board on the refurb models
Okay.
because you can get a refurbished 64 gig for under £300 in the UK. But they're never in stock these days. They're just always sold out. So I have no idea when we'll be getting more refurbished models in.
Okay, so it looks like the summer sale, it was cheaper. It was, I think, $130 off. Oh no, all right. No, you're looking at the same. You're looking at about the same. Either way, this is a good deal. This is a great time to buy. Yeah, this
Yeah, and
is
there's and
almost
and
exactly
obviously
the
there's
same as the best sale it's ever had. It's a few dollars more.
yeah, and there's a ton of games on sale as well for the 20th anniversary, and there's like new stuff in the points shop if customizations, any of that stuff that you care about. So go check it out if you haven't already. I'm sure everyone already has because you turn on your Steam Deck and you go to the store and it's in your face. It's there.
Sure. But yeah, if you've been on the fence, I think now's probably a good time to buy ahead of the holidays, you know? All right, so that's
Yeah.
not what we're here to. That's enough of that. Enough shilling for Valve. You go buy a Steam Deck,
Mm,
everybody.
yeah.
We're gonna shill about some other stuff, right? Because we talked all last week about Valve has a new piece of hardware coming. We know Valve has a new piece of hardware coming. There's debate as to, is it a deck? Is it the next VR device? We talked all about that last week on the show with Chris. So if you missed that conversation, make sure you go check it out. We'll give you a brief recap today if you didn't get to listen to it so that you can, keep up. But I definitely recommend going and listening to that episode before this one because we get pretty deep into the story over there, and some of that foundational knowledge will definitely benefit you during today's discussion. But if you haven't gotten a chance to check it out, we'll give you the broad strokes so you can keep up. So where we're at, right, is we know Valve's next headset is on the way. It seems now, based on what we talked about last week, that it's imminent, right? That was your takeaway, Steve, right? Was that what the patent we were looking at was for a VR headset, correct?
Yeah, I think it was too soon for another Steam Deck, and I don't know that there was enough reasoning there. Whereas we'd seen this patent for the and like rumors of the Galileo, and there was a bunch of other things. I think Brad Lynch had found a ton of stuff in Steam Steam's VR mode had multiple updates and seemed to be pointing towards the fact that the index is getting long in the tooth. What's next for VR from Valve?
Right. And obviously there was the context from last week that that came from sadly it's Bradley, who I did want to give a shout out because this is 2 weeks in a row where he's been the primary source behind the stories at hand. So great work to Bradley and his team, which includes some of the folks from his Discord community. So great work to the sadly it's Bradley community for you know sniffing all this out. So what we learned last week, right, was we know that the Steam Deck uses a custom AMD APU called Van Gogh, and we also know that the Steam Deck was codenamed Jupiter when it was in development, and that the Van Gogh APU was codenamed Aerith. Last week, we had a report from Phoronix, which is a Linux website, who had found that there was a new device codenamed Galileo with a new APU codenamed Sephiroth.
Hmm.
So obviously you can see the kind of naming convention carrying through both of those. So, that sets up we know that this new device is coming. Now this week we have some updates that may hint to the idea that the new headset could actually come with some kind of consoleized PC, more or less, some external device that does the computing for the headset, right? We talked, I believe last week when Chris and I were discussing this about how you know wanting to come out and compete in the modern VR market, you do kind of want people want tetherless headsets, right? But if you want to be able to do the really high end stuff like Half Life Alex and the stuff that I think Valve's audience is going to tend to gravitate towards, you need that extra computing power. You just do.
And by tetherless, you mean a standalone unit like the Quest 2, where the
Correct.
computing's being done on the headset. Because the rumor is that this is going to support full wireless casting, from the little box, if that is the case, to the VR headset. And I think that's worth noting that, the Quest 2 is the most popular VR headset. Price point was probably a really big reason for it, but people do also just like the fact that it's wireless and they can shove it on their face. But the games just aren't quite there. They're not up to par with what you get on PC. You can see that's why people still gravitate towards PC VR, and it's a big thing. And also the expandability of it. You can't do full room scale VR on these standalone headsets. And it seems like this is pointing towards Valve potentially following the same route as the PSVR, in that there's a box in your room, it sits there. Maybe that box could also be a Steam Deck. I'd certainly love it if I didn't need to buy a separate unit and I could use the Steam Deck as the compute unit and have the deckard connected to the Steam Deck. I think that would be a good use case of using the Steam Deck for that. But it means that the headset can be lighter, doesn't need to have all of the compute power on the headset itself, and it can offload that to an external device. So if it's following the same process that the PSVR does, I kind of feel like this makes sense as a strategy. What do you think?
Well, I think it depends a lot on what we're actually talking about because there is evidence to pointing to the idea that like this is that or something a little more than that. And I think the reality of it feels kind of murky based on what we know and what we don't know. Because part of the research that came up here, right, was there's back in February, there's a data miner who's goes by the name Rasbo. And they discovered something that was known as Galileo EV2 in the Steam Deck's
Mm,
firmware, right? So the EV standing for engineering validation, which is the stage you reach in design where the product is not yet mass production ready, right? And we've talked a lot about the number of different iterations that the Steam Deck went through before it was finalized. We talked last week about the idea that maybe Galileo or Sephiroth or some of these other like code names that are showing up in this code could relate to like development specific devices, and that it doesn't necessarily mean that it's like um a consumer based product, right? But like when you get into some of the specifics of the devices, it gets a little more interesting. So in that Galileo EV2 description, right? The device is referenced as having a proximity sensor and a small circular touchscreen display, right? Both things that are obviously not on the Steam Deck. So that again points to the idea of like something else, right? Then when you get into like some of the context from some of the past reporting that's come up from Bradley or just from like stuff we've seen around Valve's VR efforts in the past, right? Like you mentioned before, there is mention in the original Deckard, research that Bradley put out that it would support VR Link, right? Which is like taking advantage of like a wireless
Mhm.
um, feature, like the Quest Air, right? But basically rather than going through your Wi-Fi network, you're going off of the PC. So like that's the first time you have a mention of the Deckard being able to be like paired with another device, right? Because like most standard desktop PCs, which is what you would assume the vast majority of Valve's user base are using, they don't have wireless chips, right? So like that does kind of point to the idea of there being this other device in the mix, right? And like you think about like the touchscreen wrinkle of it, and it's like, or like not even a touchscreen, but like the circular touch thing that could be a power button on a console, right? Like that's how the power button works on like the remodeled Xbox 360 or the first PS4, right? And like
Yeah, or the
it does
Xbox One, the original
sure,
Xbox One. It's,
yeah.
it's the Xbox logo. It's just a touch button.
So, like, that does, to me, feel like it's pointing to like, all of that seems to point to the idea that this thing is interacting with another device that is not your PC, right? And
Do you think that's a companion device though? So do you think there's multiple things in play here, whereby there may be the headset that uses a similar chipset that's in the Steam Deck and it can play some games? I'm thinking things like Beat Saber that we've seen on the Quest, other games that we've seen on the Quest, like that Iron Man title, things like that,
sure.
that could be played on the Quest. But then for the larger titles, it needs to utilize an external device, and this external device is like a way for you to get there in the same way that Steam machines were kind of posed to take over the living room and be a gateway into PC gaming into the living room. Could this box be a gateway into desktop PCs and like PC VR rather than it being like a truly wireless device?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I'm leaning because the other thing that I wanted to call out, and I did want to quickly give a shout out. We kind of like got into the meat of the story before I was able to say this, but some of the info I'm pulling here comes from an article by David Heaney over at Upload VR. So make sure you go give him a click. We'll have that in the description as well. And one of the things that I wasn't aware of until I saw this in David's article is all the way back in, let me see, it was 2019, right? So Valve was demoing Half-Life Alyx to the press in late 2019, and there is what looks like a console, like a consoleized PC, if you want to call it that. That's what David calls it. But it looks like a console, and it is in the demo room at Valve headquarters, and the device is also clearly visible in the video that Jeff Keighley produced, the final hours of Half-Life Alyx behind closed doors at Valve. So like this is something that like seemingly has been bopping around since their last headset. And like I'll show it to the folks on YouTube here if you want to check it out. But and Steve, definitely pull this up and take a look on your end
Oh
here.
yeah, it very much looks like the exactly what's included in the pattern, right? You look at the pattern that they had for this,
Yeah.
it looks identical. For me, I looked at it, no one would have looked at that twice. we'd have just seen it and we go, oh, maybe they're still using Steam machines there, or this is just like a little box that they've made or something. But it's clearly got like two USB ports at the bottom, or two ports of some kind at the bottom.
Mhm.
It looks like there's a cable coming out the back of it, whether that's power or a display port or something, because in the larger picture you can see there's a screen to the left. But that could also be the cable that's tethered to the Valve Index. There's a single cable that comes
Sure.
off of the Index and goes. It could go into the back. It looks a similar thickness. So there's a lot of things it could be, but there's also a massive desktop PC sat next to it. So it might be doing nothing. This might be like just a box that they watch stuff on in their
It
in their
it
office.
could be, but it's like when you start lining it up with the other information we know, it feels suspect. It feels like too
Yes.
much smoke for there to be no fire, right? Where it's like in that patent that we described, right? That was found by Bradley's team. Uh, it it like I showed it to you on YouTube. They look identical, right? Like that's what it looks like, and that is exactly what the firmware of the Galileo like mentions, right? Like it like having this circular display and all that stuff. Like that's what this, and this could just be a power button on this device, I guess, but it certainly looks like what we're talking about. So, I don't know, like it seems like a lot of stuff lining up for it to have no correlation. And the other thing that I think definitely cements the idea that like what we saw last week is a VR announcement, if you're still on the fence about that, is there is another bit of evidence in that came from Bradley's team, which is that they discovered a recently created Steam sub, is what they call it, which is a collection of games created by Valve. Where the first title added was Half Life Alyx, along with many other VR games. On Friday, Valve added even more games, still all VR. And then some context that David added to this, right, was that Valve created a similar sub back when the Index launched, and it was specifically to show recommended games for testing to press and testers of the product. So, and then when you look at that list, most of the games on that list are not games that could be supported by a standalone headset. Like the
Oh
chipsets just
yeah,
don't
absolutely
exist.
not. No. You know, even Half-Life Alyx on its own, right? It's not
Right?
going to.
Could not.
Fallout 4 VR is not going to. I mean, maybe it could. I don't know, but um, Tabletop Simulator, we've not seen that on a standalone
Mhm.
VR headset. That's only on PC. Subnautica, I can't imagine that coming to a
And
standalone headset.
one other thing is the team, Bradley's team, also found references to a share screen function that mentions the ability for the Steam OS device to update a headset's firmware remotely over the local network, right? Which suggests the idea of, again, the dual architecture, right? Of there being this, uh, again, they call it a consoleized PC. You want to call it a set top box, whatever you want to call it. Another device that exists to power the headset itself. That
Yeah,
would go ahead.
did you also see yesterday that Brad tweeted about two new buttons that showed up in the
No,
new
no, no,
Steam
I didn't
client
see that.
update? So
So what are you looking at?
in the latest Open VR SDK, um, I'll pop it here for you. Apparently, there are two new buttons referenced: button reserved 0 and button reserved 1. They don't have names currently, but they sit underneath the index controller buttons currently: index controller A and index controller B, along with index controller joystick. They're in the same region in the source code. So I would imagine it's two buttons that are related to VR. They're not used anywhere in current Valve hardware, according to Brad.
Huh. Okay. So what do you make of that? Is that new functionality on a set of VR
It could be
controllers?
additional, like yeah, it could be additional buttons on a controller, or it could be buttons, like the button on the box, like if that's a new button and it needs to do something. Because the buttons in here are anything, like we've got grip buttons, D-pad buttons, They
Yeah.
call the proximity sensor, they count that as a button. The VR touchpad, they count that as a button. If there's
Huh.
any kind of input
What
method
the fuck?
here,
So it's like a new input method then, theoretically.
that would be my guess, yeah.
2, no less.
Yeah.
What the hell does
It
that
could be
look
like one on each controller if it's a 2 controller system.
Yeah.
It could be new buttons on the box. It could be buttons on the headset itself, you know, maybe they're
Microphone,
volume or it
microphone.
well, or it could be like volume buttons if they're standalone things. You can maybe have like
Sure.
volume buttons on there. Or it could be a share button. Maybe they're adding a share button. There's all sorts of things it could be.
Another, interesting wrinkle to the idea of this requiring some kind of standalone device. This is another thing that David pointed out is like if Valve were going to have a fully standalone headset, they would have to make a separate Steam VR store for that headset because so many of these games through Steam just don't work.
Do you think they would bother, or do you think I don't think they would. I think what they would do would be the same approach they did with the Steam Deck, where you
Have a
have
verified?
a verified scheme, you know, index verified or whatever they call the next headset,
Yeah.
deckard verified, where
I could
they've
see that.
tested them, they know these games work. You know, there's a list of like 50 games in that VR sub that you mentioned. I could imagine all of those have gone through a verification process, and then they could also allow you to experiment and play other games if you wanted to. And I would also imagine that you could probably play normal games, like flat games, like games that you would play on your Steam Deck, but just on like a big screen and a VR headset if you wanted
Yeah.
to. And so you'll just be able to download those and play those. At least that's how I would imagine it would work.
That seems to make sense to me. You know, like
Yeah, you
that
could do the same thing in the Index at the moment. You know, you could basically just have
right.
like a 50-inch screen in front of your face if you want to.
Yeah. So, like, I would imagine that functionality sticks around for sure. So before before we get into, I guess, the case against it, what do you think about this on its face? Because I do have some quotes here from Gabe that seem to push back on the idea of this being a thing, but like, do you think this makes sense in theory? This idea of this having like a companion
I
device,
think
like,
it
and
does. Yeah.
how,
I
what do you envision it actually being though? Like,
so I
a
think
is this essentially a set top PC?
I think so. Yeah. So I think the headset itself, I think, is probably going to be what we've expected it to be. It's a competitor for the Quest 3, the impending Quest 3 that's due out later this year. I think that's going to have pretty similar specs to what we've got in the Steam Deck, and they'll utilize the same kind of hardware that they've got. And we'll see smaller games because a lot of the games on that list that Brad posted are smaller titles. You know, there's things like Beat Saber on there and Synth Rider. We know those games run on standalone headsets because they're available on the Quest. Job Simulator, that's available on the Quest. Those titles I can imagine will run fine when it's running in like standalone mode. And then I think there's a companion device
You think that's the
that
case though? You
allows
think it'll have a standalone mode?
I think so, yeah. I think they want a standalone mode so you can just play it wherever you are, and it have like inside out tracking like the Index does, so you can just get going if you want to. And then I think that it'll be a standalone device that will do two things. One, it will improve the compute power because it'll be plugged into the wall. It could potentially have a beefier GPU or a beefier AMD APU, which is seemingly what it's going to have, and also enable room tracking where you can have the Valve Index. I think they call them beacons, the little trackers that you can
The
put around the
cameras.
room, so that you can improve the tracking of the device and have room scale tracking. And I think those are the two things that that box will
So
allow you to
so
do.
ta so talk to me about that though. So like this box, in your mind, I buy the deckard, right? It comes with this box that offloads the computing to this device. Does that
Mhm.
device then plug into my PC? Or
No,
is
I don't
this
think so. I think it's a standalone thing, and I think you can just use a PC instead if you want to. I don't think you need this device
you don't see this as
at all.
mandatory?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I could be totally wrong, but I kind of if this is a VR thing, a VR package, you know, at the moment you can buy everything piecemeal. You can get the Index and the controllers for 689 in the UK, but you want to do the whole kit with the beacons,
Yeah.
with the bait, they call them base stations. With the base stations, that comes in at 900.
So what do you think how do you feel like the wireless comes into that though? So it's like you're thinking you can buy it basically modular where it's like if you want it out of the box and it's a fully functional experience, you buy that full set at that price point you just said. You get this set top box kind of thing that works as like a modular, PC similar to the Steam Deck. Or what, you install a wireless card in your PC and you just use that instead?
Yeah, or you continue to use it with a single cable in the same way that you do with the Index
You think
currently.
it'll support the cable still?
Yeah, I think so. You're gonna have to charge it anyway, and it's probably gonna be
That's a good point.
USB-C in
That's
order
a
to
good
do
point.
that,
Yeah.
and the Quest allows you to plug straight into a PC with a single cable,
I could see
so
that
why not do that?
I could see that being an advantage anyway, right? Because it's like ideally you wanna play with no wires, but if you were, like, in the middle of a session and your headset starts to die and you're like, you wanna keep playing, ideally, you wanna be able to just plug it in and keep rocking, right?
Yeah.
So that makes sense to me. Yeah, I think that's a good point. So, here's my question, though. Like, what do you make of that device that we saw from 2019, right? Like, is this something intended for mass market, or is this a development tool? Like, is this thing gonna is
Oh,
this
you
thing
mean the thing
gonna
when
be
when
required?
G-Man's when G-Man's playing on, Half-Life Alyx?
Yeah, yeah, that the image we looked at that compares to that patent, right? Where it looks like this set top box. It's like,
Um,
how does
I
that
kind of feel like
how does that
this
factor in?
looks I don't think this is what it's gonna look like if it comes out. It looks dated now.
Yeah.
It looks like a device from that era.
It
It
looks like one
looks
of the
like
older
a
models of
m
the Steam Deck, right? Where
yeah,
you're like,
or
"This
it
ain't
looks
done
like a
yet."
Steam machine. It looks like
Yeah.
the one of the original Steam machines, or it looks like an original Xbox One that's, like, stood on its side, and it's got, like, glossy plastic, and it also looks a little bit like a VHS where, like, you got that little triangle thing that opens up at the front. I I don't I don't think it looks like this. I think this was probably for a patent, because you look at the patents for the deckard, I'd imagine it's not gonna look identical to that. You look at the patents for the Steam Deck, it's not gonna look like that. They go through iterations. We saw
Yeah.
that with the Steam Deck, where Plagman posted pictures of the iterations they went through with the Steam Deck. It could also be that this is nothing, that people file patents all the time and nothing comes to
That's what I'm
fruition.
talking about with, like, the it being a development tool, right? Of, like, it's something that's not intended for mass market. But then it's like you come back to this thing where, like, it seems like a core part of the functionality is this wireless transfer, right?
Mm.
And it's like, if that's the case, I can't imagine that this thing goes to market and they're just like, "Hey, you have to buy a wireless chip for your PC with it," right? Like, that feels
You
like
don't necessarily need to. I could see them doing a dongle, like, here's
exactly.
a dongle that
Yeah,
you
yeah.
they sell.
What I was gonna say is there needs to be a solution, and, like, it could be as
Yeah.
something as simple as a dongle, but, like, I guess there's an argument to be made that, like and I guess this is my question to you is, like, does this make sense as a product? Like, do you think this is something people will buy into? Because like, is it is it the type of device that this being an all-in-one solution for VR that lets you, get into the Steam ecosystem, like, does it have the same kind of like Pied Piper effect that the Steam Deck does for the Steam store for folks that
Mm.
are not going to play on PC, where it's like, oh, like I can buy this and out of it, like I don't need to buy a PlayStation 5 with it. I don't need to build a PC. I don't need to do X or Y or X or Y. Like you can just get it and have a dedicated VR device that is capable of the
Well,
top end of VR and not having to, have this overpowered device arguably that does all these other things that you're not looking to do, right? I don't know.
I can't see that this would be a singular functional device, that this is only for VR and only used for VR. They keep calling it a consoleized PC, right, in the
Yeah.
article. I think that's 100% what it is. It'll be a PC in the same way that the Steam Deck's a PC, and I can imagine that means I'll be able to run big picture mode on it, and I'll be able to boot into to SteamOS on it,
So
and I'll be
you
able to play games.
so like
And
is this our Steam machine?
I think
Is this the
so. I
device
think
you and I
that's
have been talking about wanting?
Yeah, I think so, and I think when you look at it that way, I think a lot of people would want it. People love their Steam Decks, and they want something that's always plugged in to the wall. This won't be that much more powerful than a Steam Deck. It's using a very similar APU by the sounds of it, but it can run at higher power, probably at a much higher TDP because it's plugged into the wall all the time. The Steam Deck Max is at 15 watts. If you could say run it at 30 watts with better active cooling, because there's a bigger box for it to be in, and it doesn't need to be as quiet because it's not near your face, and you can just don't have to worry about battery life because it's always plugged into the wall all the time, then you can run it at higher watts. You can run it at 30 watts. You can run it at 35 watts, 45 watts. Who knows how far they can push that APU? There's probably already a generation, even if it's like a mid generation ahead of where they were with the Steam Deck. I can imagine you'll probably get games targeting 1080p 30 on it, which I think would be enough for a lot of people. Maybe you'll get some games that run at 1080p 60, but it's got to be able to run things like Half-Life Alyx at least 90 frames per second, because otherwise people will get motion sick.
Right.
So if
So
it's if it's
it's gotta be pretty powerful.
yeah, maybe you could run it. Maybe they're doing something there. Like it could run it at 72 hertz. There's some games on the Quest that run at 72 hertz, and that people are fine with that. That seems to be the bare minimum. Maybe they're doing some kind of interpolation. Maybe this is where FSR3's frame generation comes into play, where if they can get the games to run at 60, they can basically double the frame rate to 120, and
Right.
that enables these games to be playable. And that's the reason a device like this is even possible. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see, but I cannot see that they go from a headset that's completely piecemeal at the moment. You know, you can buy the Index controllers. They work with an HTC Vive that they don't even sell anymore. That you could have bought years and years and years ago, and it was like the precursor to the Valve Index.
Right.
Or you can buy a Valve Index on its own if you just want to use a normal controller, or you could buy it with controllers, or you could buy the whole kit, or you could buy just a single base station. I can't see that they go from a piecemeal solution that they've got now to forcing you into buying a box when you've already got a PC or you've already got a Steam Deck. I'd be interested to see if they utilize the Steam Deck in any interesting ways here. I would hope they would, because a lot of people have them. And if I don't need to buy a box, if I've already got a Steam Deck and it can connect to that in some way to do some more computing, then that would be
Maybe.
great.
Yeah. I wonder though. I really do.
I don't think so. I kind of feel like you're gonna need the box or you're gonna need a PC.
Yeah.
But I really hope that the box does a lot more, and it's that little PC that we've been looking for to
The
put in
living
our
room
living
PC.
room,
Yeah, right?
that, you know, we can play things like Baldur's Gate 3, and I can then cloud save up to
Yeah.
Steam Cloud, and then I can download it, and it's ready to go on my Steam Deck when I wanna go.
So talk to me about this, right? So we're thinking it's similar in power to the deck, right? In terms of raw components, but like basically where that extra wiggle room comes from is the fact that, it's not a handheld device. It doesn't have to, contend with all these other factors, right? It can just take full advantage of the chipset and the processing power that is available um as if it were like a more standard PC. Cool. So what's that cost then? Because like is this going to become like a really interesting like option for a budget level entry PC? Because like you think about it, the Steam Deck not that expensive, right? Like the most expensive, we'll split the difference, right? It's about $500, right?
And I
Versus
think it's probably the same price, because you can take away things like the trackpad, the buttons, the
the
screen, all of
screen.
that's taken away. But you've got then better cooling in there. There's probably a chunkier heat sink in there. Copper's
Yeah.
expensive. You know, you're paying for the raw material there. And then the storage, because you're probably going to want more than 64 gigs if you're going to be, installing these big games on there. But you could just plug in you can easily allow people to put in a
Expandable
normal
storage.
sized
Yeah.
NVMe drive. It doesn't have to be one of the 2230 drives. It could be one of the bigger ones. And you could just have USB-C or even Thunderbolt plugs on there. Maybe it allows for eGPUs. Who knows? There's a lot of things they could do, and I'd really like to see them do. I think $500 is probably the price point that they're looking to target. I could see that maybe being the base price, and it goes up from there. But that's a really good price point for an entry level PC that's focused on the living room. I really hope it comes also with a new controller. Don't think it will, because they've spoken about letting maybe partnering with third parties to do a new Steam
Yeah,
controller.
and it's like you'd think that we would have seen patents around it at this point, but then it's like we did see that patent with the new button stuff, so
And
it's
maybe their solution is you use the VR controllers, like, as if they're like 2 Joy-Cons, and they've got all the
maybe.
touch inputs on there anyway. They've got the trackpads, and they've got all the buttons, and they've got the triggers on the
Yeah.
sticks, that you can squeeze.
Yeah, and then maybe their thought is, like, use that, and if you wanna use, a more quote unquote "traditional" controller, like, well, hook up your Xbox controller, hook up a
Yeah,
PlayStation
you've probably
controller,
got one anyway, yeah.
right? You probably do.
Yeah, it just means that you can't play those PC games that require trackpads, and that's the
Right.
problem that we've got at the moment,
But, like,
is that there's no real solution for that if you plug into the TV.
theoretically, though, right? Like, you're in the same situation, right? Like, if you're plugging a PC into your TV and you wanna use it across the room, you use a wireless Bluetooth mouse or whatever, right? Like, there are solutions available, and they're just not presented by Valve because they're standard control options. Valve doesn't need to make a custom PC and, I didn't mean PC, keyboard and mouse set because you wanna use one, in your living room.
Yeah.
Doesn't really make
Yeah.
sense.
No, but it would be really nice, as I like the Steam controller. I just think it needs a modern version, and I think it could be really great. Those trackpads are so good. I use
They've
them all the time, and
they
gyro is phenomenal.
they've learned, right? Like, the original Steam controller was bad. Like, we don't need to mince words. There's a reason they were selling them for, like, $1 at one point. But, like, the deck, like, I'm with you. Like, the trackpads on the deck are awesome. Like, the system of the control scheme of the deck is awesome. I think if you could just do basically the opposite of what PlayStation did with, Project Q, where you just pull the screen out and just give me the same form factor, like, and, smaller, like, that would be great? Like, ergonomically and everything, I'm super happy with how it feels in my hands. If I could just have one that was, like, this big instead,
Yeah, it would be
that would
great.
that'd be
Yeah,
great,
just
right?
do the
Like,
reverse of what Sony did, where they put a screen in between
yeah, that's what I'm
the
saying. You just pull it
controller.
out.
Just take the screen out and shove them together,
That's what I need.
and they could call it the Valve Portal. It's the portal to
Sure.
your living room.
Sure. Do it. Do it.
You
I'm
know
in.
what they should call it? The Portal. They should call this new device the Portal, with the big circle on it, and it should glow blue or orange. And it shouldn't be a full set, it should be like a little oval shape.
They should name it GLaDOS so that nobody will buy it.
Yeah. Imagine if they launched Portal 3 with this, and that's their, like, way of doing it, and it's
Their
like,
killer app.
because the killer app, remember the initial launch
Yeah,
for Steam
Alex.
Steam Deck was
Oh, never
the
mind.
Aperture Lab,
Yeah.
Aperture Desktop. So I could imagine they could do something similar with the deckard, or whatever this ends up being called.
So, okay. So before we get into letting Big Papa Gabe poo poo this idea, you're saying around $500. Does that make sense?
Well,
Like, does that say it's somewhere in that ballpark, right?
yeah.
Do you think that this is a viable product? Like, is this something that does have that ability to, like, bring people into the ecosystem and be a device like the Steam Deck? Or, like, is it too niche? Like, like, at a $500 price point, like, you made the point that, like, maybe there will be some games you can get 1080, 60, like, but, like, are you really gonna buy this thing for $500 if that's the performance ceiling on it versus, any of the other
Mm.
devices you could pick? Like, that's halfway towards a much better gaming PC if you really want a gaming PC. And if you don't want a gaming PC, right? If what you want is, effectively a PC in your living room, right? Like, yeah, I mean, like, sure, there is a specific person that wants that, and that this is for. We've talked about that. I definitely think a market for this product exists, but I wonder what the price point and the specs have to be for it to actually be attractive. Because, like, if it's not on par performance wise with something like, say, the PlayStation 5 or the Xbox Series X, why would you buy it for $500 instead of those? And, like, you could argue that this is not a device that is like that mass market, that, like the Steam Deck, it's going to speak to a specific group of people and that's all it needs to do, and, like, Valve's happy with that and yada yada. Maybe that's the case, but I wonder how much like what the performance ultimately is
That's the
impacts
big question, right?
whether
Is
or
the
not this is actually
performance.
a product anybody wants.
Yeah, because if the performance is much better than we're thinking, and it is on par with, say, a PS5, it could be exactly the same price point as a PSVR 2 plus a PS5 in order to get into a superior VR system, right?
And a
PC
and a really
VR,
and a really good ecosystem, right? Like,
yeah.
getting into the Steam ecosystem, but not having to build a gaming PC, I think is really attractive if you can do it in a way that has big picture mode, front and center in the way they have with the Steam Deck. The Steam Deck, I think, demystifies PC gaming in a huge way, and if they
Oh,
could
yeah,
do that
yeah.
with what is effectively a home console, I think that could be a really huge win for them, and maybe huge win by Valve's metric of success, right? In the way that the Steam Deck was a huge win for them. It doesn't necessarily need to compete numbers
Mhm.
wise with those other devices, but if you're asking me to shell out $500, I want this to be a device I can make an argument for in my arsenal. I can make an argument for the Steam Deck because it's portable. It does all this stuff. Like, it offers so much. It brings so much to the table. If I'm talking about a device that's going to compete with my PlayStation or my Xbox, I need it to be have parity with those devices in terms of performance.
I
You
don't
know,
know that I don't know that it can have parity. I mean, it's possible, but I feel like
relative parity anyway.
those consoles are sold at a loss, and, I mean, at least the Series X is. Phil Spencer's confirmed that. So I don't know if Valve are willing to sell the device at a massive loss. I mean, if they can get
I mean,
this
how much of a
down,
loss do we sell does the Steam Deck sell at? Do we know? We don't. I don't think, but
I don't necessarily know that it does sell at a loss.
you don't think so?
No, I don't think so.
Maybe
I could
not.
see them breaking even. Maybe it's economies of scale that they sold so many now that it doesn't sell at a loss.
I feel like there's such an argument to be made though, like with what we talked about, where like if you buy this device, like you're gonna buy Steam games, and like
And
that's the
maybe
trade.
they're
That's
looking at
why
that
you sell
metric.
consoles at
Yeah.
a loss, right? You sell your PlayStation or your Xbox at a loss because then they buy all their games from you. And
I mean, it's possible. Maybe they go for 399 or 349 and they target that price point
like
instead and they get
imagine that.
really aggressive with it.
Imagine it's like $400 instead of
I mean, that's on
$500.
par with like a say it's like Series S level pricing,
Yeah.
right? That's like
But
300, 400.
but imagine it's got power that's maybe a little bit closer to the X or the 5, like, I think then that becomes a really interesting, attractive device of like, oh, I can get into the Steam ecosystem. It's $400, and it's like it's basically it can be the third console in your arsenal, right? Or whatever, right? Second, that could be maybe you buy that instead of an Xbox and you play your Xbox
Yeah, I
games
mean, that's
there.
a good
Like, you
reason.
could
That's a
do
good
that,
reason, yeah.
you know? It's,
Yeah, absolutely.
there are so many.
Especially if it supports like eGPUs, so you can like, upgrade it in the future, and you're not like
Yeah,
bound by what's on the integrated GPU on the APU. So
you can give
I think
yourself like
that's
a
a
pro
compelling case for
refresh
it.
in every couple of
Yeah.
years if you want, and just throw a new GPU in there, right? Like,
I'd really like that, and I do think that, yes, this is gonna be a niche device, but I think if they can show that there's multi-use case for it, that this is a great entry into a really good ecosystem, not just for PC games, but also for VR. They've got the best VR games that aren't available anywhere else. You know, Half-Life Alyx is arguably the best VR game. I would imagine they're working on new stuff to come
they're
out
probably making an Alex
alongside
too,
this new
right?
device.
You know, you
They've
gotta
gotta be,
imagine.
right?
You
Yeah.
gotta imagine. Been 4
So
years.
they're the best place to be for VR, and I think VR enthusiasts know that PC VR is the best place to be. And if they can have like a standalone, like all-in-one solution where you can maybe upgrade as you go, right? Oh, I'm gonna start with the base headset. That'll work fine for me because I'm only gonna play Beat Saber and maybe a couple of other things, and then I want to upgrade, and I'm gonna now get the little device for the living room. They become like little gateway entries for you. I also think that a lot of people bought a Steam Deck thinking that, oh, it's cool, I'll play a couple of games, you know, and then they got sucked in. I was one of them, right? You were one of them. We never really played PC games before, and we ended up using this device so much that we started a podcast about it. And I think that people that bought the Steam Deck are looking for a better solution to play in their living room than the docked solution offers them at the moment, because the docked solution sucks on the Steam Deck, quite frankly, and they do really need to spend some time to fix it. But if all of it seems to be coming together, that if SteamOS 3.5 has maybe been delayed so that this can come out, and we've got FSR 3 in the pipeline, and there's the potential that it's a standalone thing that might also work with the Steam Deck, that might also have a little PC component that you could put in the living room. All of that starts to make sense, as this is like an ecosystem of hardware that Valve is creating, and the Steam Deck was just one component of that, and we're now seeing the rest of it.
Yeah, and I do hope that's what we're seeing. You know, like you and I have talked a lot about that and about how, Valve has kind of struggled in the hardware space over the last
Yeah.
couple decades. And like with the Steam Deck, there is just such a I just feel like they're firing on all cylinders, right? They're on such a different level of competence than they were when they tried to partner with folks in the past to do the Steam machines. And there's all these SKUs, and it's confusing, and it's not the clarity of vision that you have with the Steam Deck, where the
I
Steam Deck
think they
isn't
learned their lesson.
immediately. Yeah, yeah, I totally agree with you. I think they learned all the right lessons from the failures they made in the 2010s, and I think seeing how successful the Steam Deck has been, and how strong their vision has been for the Steam Deck, and how that influences big picture mode, which is going to play into the SteamOS 3.5 release. That's going to open up all these other devices to take advantage of SteamOS. And like something that I didn't even really think about until now is like, back then with the Steam machines and everything, like Proton didn't exist. Like you didn't have,
Well, they created Proton for the Steam machine. That was their
but it
reasoning.
wasn't there at launch, right? Like that was something that came out.
No, I think so. I think but it was had very minor support,
Okay.
and they started initially trying to make Linux versions of all their games, and then worked, with, God, I can't remember the Code Weavers, I think it is, who were the creators of, a piece of software that let you run PC games on a Mac and also on Linux. Then they worked with them and, created the first version of Proton, and have continued to work on it as an open source project ever since then.
And like, look at how far it's come, right? So like I think the idea of Valve now, like from everything they've learned, re-entering the hardware space and being like, yeah, no, we have two dedicated devices, and maybe there's a SKU where there's different versions and whatever, but it's so much easier like the Steam Deck is an immediately understandable device, and for you to go in and be like, which model do you want, and there's three models, and the breakdown is very simple. Like I really, really think that could work now. I think they could release a Steam machine now. We did a whole episode about it, right? Where it could fill that same niche that the Steam Deck has, where it speaks to a user that wants to have more ways to interact with the Steam ecosystem, and not limit the Steam ecosystem to a specific type of quote unquote like PC gamer, right? Like the person that wants to build and maintain a rig. Because there are a lot of people that want to play PC games, or would like the option to play PC games, that are just not interested in doing that. And it doesn't it only hurts Valve to not have plays to market to those people, and to expose new markets to the insane value that is provided by their storefront. Whether that's discoverability of new games, or like deep discounts of games, right? Like having a Steam library is awesome, and it's a library that grows with you. And like, if you decide you want to get into proper PC and you want to build a PC, guess what? That Steam library that you started building on Deck, or that you started building on the deckard, and whatever we call this thing, that comes with you, and it can be just another SKU in your arsenal, right? And when you do want to sit down and relax at your TV, you've got your Steam box. When you are on the road, or when you're visiting your parents, or you're sitting up in your bed at night, or your partner's using the TV, you've got your Steam Deck. And when you want to go, you know, all out buck wild, you want to use your ultra wide monitor, 100, 200 frames per second, right? Like that's when you go and sit on your desktop. Like they should be committed to that vision, because that's the version where Steam exists wherever you are. And that's their path forward to growing their audience more, and like getting more people to have the loyalty to the Steam brand the way that they do to any of the other stuff that they're using. the way the PC
Yeah.
gamers do.
I think then after that, the next steps are streaming, a subscription service, and they go all out as a whole platform rather than just
Yeah.
being a storefront. They
I
become a
I
platform.
think that's the move because the storefront is already strong. Like the ecosystem is strong. All you have to do is start adding functionality to it. And because think about
Oh,
it,
yeah, and you gotta imagine they hate being tied to Microsoft's platform. It's a big
that's gotta be why
competitor.
Linux. That's why
Yeah.
SteamOS is going mass market like that for sure, right? Like they want to get out from under their thumb.
Yeah, because 'cause you've gotta you've gotta build a PC, you gotta buy a Microsoft license, a Windows license, and they're stuck on that ecosystem using all of Microsoft's tool chain, DirectX, direct storage, all of that stuff. It's the reason Proton exists is so that they don't have to be stuck at Microsoft's whim.
Right. And this only strengthens
And
that,
this little
right?
yeah, this little box enables them to be like, "Hey, you don't even need to have a PC, you don't even need to buy a PC." It could be like, you just buy this box, you put it in your living room, and you've got all of your Steam games that you were playing on your deck, and you can just carry on and play them in your living room.
Hmm. Oh, and I think like with how far big picture mode has come, it's easier than ever to be like, this isn't a PC. Even if it is. Even if it
No, because
has
it would I would imagine it boots into the game mode in the same way that
same
the
way that the
Steam
Steam
Deck
Deck
does,
does.
and then you can go into desktop mode if you want to. I would like to see them have an option if they do a box like this where I can choose which mode I want it to be when it boots by default. Do I want it to be a desktop? Because I can imagine a use case where people just like, "I'm gonna put this on my desk, and I'm gonna do general PC things on it as well as gaming." But I want it on a desk because I'm gonna use, like, a steering wheel or a flight stick or something like that, and I'm gonna have it plugged into a monitor, and that's where I like to be. Or I'm playing games that play better with a keyboard and mouse, like a real-time strategy game, and they want it on a desk, and the desktop mode makes more sense there.
Yeah. I wonder what the size of this thing's going to be too. Because
It
that could
looked pretty
be,
small in the
it
picture.
looks pretty small. And that's interesting because, like, I could see that being an advantage of it too. Of like, like, yeah, like your Steam Deck is portable or whatever, right? But it's like if you are trying to play certain kinds of games, like the Steam Deck doesn't really, the Steam Deck is effectively a console, right? Like, yes, it's a
Yeah.
handheld PC, but I don't think it's great for playing like quote unquote like PC ass PC games, right? Like I wouldn't play League of Legends on that thing. I wouldn't play an RTS on that thing competitively. Whereas like I could see that being a situation where you're like, yeah, like I'm going to visit my parents for a week, right? I'm flying across the country. I'm gonna go visit my parents or something like that, or I'm on the road, whatever. And you want to be able to bring your PC with you and have your PC library because that's where you play games. And like maybe you buy one of those little portable monitors that are like so hot on TikTok right now that weigh like 3 pounds, and you have a portable monitor and this tiny Steam box, and you can throw that in a backpack, and it works as well as a PC. You know, with
Yeah.
whatever limitations and concessions you're gonna understand it has. Right? It's probably not a replacement for your $2,000 rig, but there's an in between between those.
Depends how old your $2,000 rig is, right? Like, it
Sure,
could be.
sure.
Um,
Yeah, good point.
it looks like a similar size to, like, a Series S, but a little bit thicker.
Yeah,
Maybe like an, Xbox 360, that last version,
yeah.
similar to that
Which, like, you
size.
could see that easily getting,
Yeah,
you throw that in a bag and it's ready to
and
roll.
I mean, I wonder if this comes out and it's got, like, a big power brick. Do you remember the original 360 with that
Yeah, dude.
the power brick that was, like, on the side?
Yeah, dude.
I could see that.
One time, I was going I was going to a friend's house, and I was packing up my Xbox, and I was like going to get the power supply, and I dropped it on my foot, and
Oh,
dude, I had the biggest, blackest bruise in like the center of my foot for like the
I'm
whole
surprised you didn't
summer.
break a bone.
I
That
know.
thing is heavy.
It was a deep bruise. It was like no joke. I was like, "Oh my god, this thing's a weapon." All right, so we've made the argument for why this thing makes sense and why we think it's going to be a cool device and why we want one. So I'm gonna let Big Papa Gabe now shit in your cornflakes. But before we do that, let me remind you that this episode of the Steam Deck Podcast is brought to you by our Patreon producers for the month of September. They are, of course, Arnold J. Rimmer, Christopher Valenz, Earth Visitor, Gabriel Hasselmeyer, aka Sobi, Snackago, Ty the Dude, and Wakahula. Thank you all so much for your support over on patreon.com/flipscreengames. You're all the realest of the real, and we greatly appreciate your support of this and all of our sister shows. Remember, if you want to go check out some of the cool content we're doing on those shows, if you want to write into the show, just like folks do for the Steam Docket, where you can get your questions answered on the air, or if you want to go and show your support over on the Patreon, you want to get the show early, you want to help us keep these mics and lights hot, you can do all that and much more by heading over to flipscreen.games. That's our website where you will find links to all the places we are all over the web and all the ways that you can get involved in the community or support the show. However you choose to get involved or show your support. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Steam Deck Podcast. All right, Steve, you ready? You ready to get bummed out?
Sure.
Because here's
So
the thing.
so
Gabe Newell,
Gabe
he's not
ruin it.
sold on the idea. He's not sold, you know? So back in and here I'm gonna throw some quotes at you and I want you to react to them, okay?
Okay.
So since 2017, Gabe Newell asked about VR many times. He's been interviewed about VR several times. There's some choice quotes I've pulled here that, you know, they paint a picture that maybe contradicts what we've been talking about. So he said in an interview in 2017, if you took the existing VR systems and made them 80% cheaper, there's still not a huge market. We actually think that if anything, most of the interesting stuff is going to be happening on the high end. That we're actually resolution constrained, we're CPU constrained, we're GPU constrained. That's where the interesting stuff is going to happen, not on the low end of the market. Once you've got it, once you've got something and you can say, okay, this is the thing that causes millions of people to be excited about it, then you can start worrying about cost reducing. So, okay. So we're painting a picture,
I
right?
think a lot's come on from 2017 though.
Sure.
Like, I think he's probably talking in response to why does the Valve Index cost $1,000 plus at least a $2,000 PC, right?
Sure.
You need a 1060, a GTX 1060 in order to be able to play Half-Life Alyx at a minimum. So, I mean, yeah, maybe now is the time. They got Half-Life Alyx, and maybe now is the time.
You're making a good argument. So now here we go, though, Steve. 2022. We have a more recent quote. He's being interviewed by One Edge magazine. And he said that this is what he said. One of the things that the Steam Deck represents is battery capable, high performance horsepower that eventually you could use in VR applications as well. You can take the PC and build something that is much more transportable. We're not really there yet, but this is a stepping stone. Okay. So who knows, right? Does that mean he's talking about wanting to have a tetherless VR headset, or is that the long-term goal, right? Is him saying we're not there yet, but this is a stepping stone? Could this device that we're describing also be a stepping stone?
It could be. It could be that the thing we've been talking about, and maybe this is a compromise with like the 50-50 of you could play some games on just the headset,
Right.
but then we do need a little bit of extra power as an assist.
And
Like
you think about it, a dedicated box, obviously a lot easier to transport with you than your desktop PC.
yeah, yeah, 100%. Especially if by default it automatically connects and I don't necessarily even need a screen, a mouse, a keyboard. I'm just bringing the box and they're paired and they're connected. And there maybe is that little touch screen on there that they patented, the little circle touch screen
So that
that
you
shows
can
me some
make selections.
information and I can do things, right? And then I don't need the whole thing.
Right.
Um, or I don't need a gaming laptop that costs $2,000 in
Or
order to be able
more,
to
right?
play.
Because that's the thing
Yeah.
is if you want a gaming laptop that can actually run some of the high end stuff, it's going to be even more money than your $2,000 desktop that you invested
Yeah.
in. So that's something. Then later that same month, so this was in February 2022 originally, right? So it's the end of February. and he says he's talking about the idea of a quote unquote tetherless integrated VR solution with Eurogamer. And he says, all these things relate to each other, right? A lot of the technology that we might be using and future versions of that comes, from technology. And I'm sorry, it's always weird when you're like reading a quote that somebody was speaking. I'm sorry if I'm
Yeah,
messing
yeah.
up his natural voice cadence. A lot of the technology that we might be using and future versions of that comes, from technology that we have to develop for VR. And then if you flip it around and you look at that as like a highly performant mobile PC gaming device, you sort of say, well, why can't I have that in a tetherless integrated VR solution? So
And
again,
that's what this sounds like, a tetherless integrated VR solution. I don't have a cable, so it's not tethered, and it's
it's
wireless,
integrated
it's
to that,
integrated.
right? But
It's like a whole thing.
yeah, it's like theoretically, I don't know. It's like you read this and you're like, okay, so it sounds like they're very obsessed of the idea of like a all-in-one device. But like when you start describing like this device as we've discussed it, it doesn't technically preclude you from that. It is tetherless. And
No,
the idea that you have to bring a small box with you is a hell of a step
most
forward compared to
people
every
aren't
other
taking
solution
their
we've got.
most people aren't taking their headsets out of their space where they play them. They just don't wanna be tied down with a cable because you hit the cable or you feel it tugging, and it takes you out of the immersion, and it's horrible.
Or you trip
And
over it or something, you knock something
yeah.
over, right?
Yeah.
Like,
I've seen some people have, like, pulley systems in their VR space where the cable goes up onto the ceiling over a pulley so they can move around and not have to feel the thing and not have to trip over it. And these cables have gotta be stupidly long in order to do that, and it's expensive. A tetherless solution is the way to go. If this box, whether it's a standalone box or a companion box that goes with a PC that enables this wireless connection, that's the that is 100% what he's talking
so,
about, and
no,
it's like a fully integrated solution.
So now let me play devil's advocate here for a second, Steve, because just what 2 weeks ago, maybe I feel like it was on the Flip Screen Games podcast, and we talked. We had Chris on over there to talk about uh, PlayStation's Project Portal, right, the device formerly known as Project Q, and we
Yeah.
talked a lot about some of the challenges associated with the Wi-Fi and its impact on streaming and the ability to uh, reliably have a high quality performance on a device that is transmitting signals through Wi-Fi
This
wirelessly.
is a
Why is this
direct
different?
connection.
Why is this
Direct
different?
connection. It's not going over the router in your house like the PlayStation Portal does, where it needs an internet connection. It's just a direct connection that is I'm connecting the the portal or not the portal, the deckard to this little box in the room. And that to me seems like the reason why it would be, um, less of an issue.
So, and correct me if I'm wrong. If this still tracks, I'd like you to explain it for me. But I have this quote here, right, that says, and this is from the the David Henley article over at Upload VR, right? And he's talking about specifically the research that sadly it's Bradley and his team had done, right? And he says the original findings suggested the headset would support a VR Link wireless feature similar to Quest's AirLink, excuse me, but where the PC creates a wireless hotspot instead of going through your local Wi-Fi network. So what you're saying is that with like Project Portal, as we discussed, or with Quest's Air Link, these devices are reliant on a Wi-Fi connection and strong internet because they're going through your router.
Yeah.
Whereas
The
with
the
this,
the Quest, for example, requires or recommends a Wi-Fi 6 router.
right? Whereas this is operating in the same way that, like, if you were to make your phone a wireless hotspot, where it's
Yeah,
the
correct, yeah.
device is specifically creating this one-to-one connection wirelessly, but with one device and not with a router. Correct?
Correct, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, so you don't have, like, both connections going to the router and then saying, "Where do I need to go?"
Right.
And potentially some packets being lost and some data being lost in the transfer. You've got a direct connection where the headset says, "I wanna connect to the box," and the box says, "Okay," and the 2 of them are then just communicating directly with one another.
So, and again, correct me if I'm wrong. it sounds to me then, right, this is happening completely offline. This is more similar to the technology that we would associate with, like, the Nintendo DS and the way that you could have
Yeah,
a wireless connection as long as you're in the same room, even if you're offline, right? Because it's local wireless connection.
that's right. Yeah, so it's pretty similar to the technology Apple uses for AirDrop. I don't know if
Okay.
you've ever used
I
that where you can
I'm
send
not, but I
files.
know what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like you find a phone nearby and kind of sends the file. That uses a combination of Bluetooth and Wi-Fi to send the file. This seems like it will be Wi-Fi, it creates a hotspot, and the headset connects to that hotspot. So it's similar to that. It's like a direct connection. A lot of cameras also do it, where you can like if you've got like a big digital camera and you want to look at the photos that are on the camera or download the photos, the camera will create a wireless hotspot. You can connect your phone to that, use the app, and download the pictures from it. And it acts as like a Wi-Fi server that's basically serving up the photos.
So do you have any concerns about how? Because, like, I feel like when it comes to this kind of functionality with, like, a traditional video game, um, I feel, like, less apprehensive about it because I feel like the idea that, like, if you're playing a game, like, through the cloud or, like, over some kind of connection like that, if you have, like, say, frame drops or if you're having, like, dips in quality or something like that, I feel like as a player, you have a certain amount of expectation that you're going to have some degradation in quality because of the way that you're interacting with it. With this being at least maybe the primary intention, right? Being to be a companion piece for VR. Is that a concern at all? Because obviously, when it comes to VR, any level of degradation is so much more
Oh, it's
destructive
very apparent. Yeah,
to the
you can see
experience,
it.
right? Because not only for
Frame
like
drops especially make you feel
right.
sick.
Yeah, like, so, like, not even for, like, the simple concept like we discussed of breaking immersion, which obviously you don't wanna do, but literally to the point where it could make you ill and be like, "I don't even wanna engage with this anymore," right?
I don't think it'll be that big of an issue. We've seen Oculus be able to achieve this with AirLink over a router. You do get some image quality degradation, but they're able to maintain the frame rate or the refresh rate. They're able to can maintain the latency with the kind of the controllers because the tracking's done on the headset itself. So it's doing the inside out tracking on the headset. So I don't think that is necessarily an issue. I do think you'll always get people who want to plug in for the very best. It's the reason the Index is popular with PC players because it's one of the headsets that has a
0 latency.
DisplayPort, and you can just plug it in, and it basically acts as a screen. And it's just a DisplayPort cable or an HDMI cable that plugs into your graphics card on your computer, versus something like the Quest 2 where it uses USB-C and then needs a piece of software, and it's doing some software encoding to then send it through a cable to the Quest 2. So there may be some image degradation here. It's hard to say though. They may have cracked it. They may have solved the problem. And I have a lot of faith in Valve. They've put a lot of research in and a lot of development into VR. They did the same thing with Proton, with SteamOS, with the Steam Deck. And Gabe seems really committed to VR. He seems to be a real fan of VR. And I think if anyone can do it, it's probably them.
Yeah, I think you're probably right.
I'd have said Oculus, but Meta got
No,
distracted with
yeah.
the metaverse and going off and trying to make this a unit for
Well,
everyone
I
and
th
targeting the low end. And I don't think that they care about it anymore.
I think the point that you made there is a really salient one because I think we've talked a lot about VR, over the last year, and I think as folks that are not huge VR enthusiasts, right? Like you've got a headset and everything, like you've engaged with VR. I was an early adopter back in the day. Um, I think there's a definitely like a barrier of entry issue with VR at like pretty much every level, but I think like the quote from Gabe about how the most interesting stuff happens on the top end, and that, like, we haven't actually really proved that there's a consumer demand for VR from more than a pretty niche number of people, I think is a really relevant point when you talk about where VR goes from here. And I think I agree with you that Valve is kind of uniquely poised to actually be the company that gets it right because of the way that they're structured, that like they're a big enough company to actually have the research and development required to make something of that quality and like make something that, you know, um can make it to a mass market like that. But they're also a flat company that encourages these very off the wall
Mhm.
creative ideas, and they're not super profit motivated. Like obviously they're a
That's
company,
the
they
big
need to make
thing.
money and
They're not too big that they've gotta be like PlayStation, for example, where if we don't sell X million number of these things, then it's seen as a failure and we probably lose interest. And, like, maybe we hear about the PSVR 2 tomorrow at the State of Play, who knows?
yeah. But
But
probably not.
probably not, they've given up on that thing. They released it and they left it to die, and that is some really impressive hardware, and it's really
And
sad.
but again, right? Like what you're saying, like I don't think Sony's wrong to do that either, though, right? Like I think for their business and how big they are, like it would be fiscally irresponsible for them to double down on a product that doesn't have as much interest as they thought it did. And it's like, yeah, they have egg on their face. And it's like, we as players lament the idea that this device has been set out to die. But it's like, what are they going to do? Continue to invest the same amount of time and resources into something that doesn't have a market share as
I
their
mean,
console? That's,
maybe do what Google did and give people refunds on, like, everything on Stadia. It's like, if you're not gonna support this thing going forwards,
yeah,
you've sold someone a
that's
device that costs, like,
That's different. That's different.
$550.
Remove that from the conversation. You're talking about ethics. I'm not talking about business ethics, like what they should or shouldn't do. That's right or like that's not relevant to the purview of this conversation. Not that I disagree with you. I think you're correct as a person. My point is more that for Valve, they can be a company that can make something that's experimental because the metric for success for them is so different. Like it
Mm,
doesn't need to sell a certain amount. It doesn't need to do X or Y. If it comes out and it flops, they'll move on from it because that's just like what they do, Like for PlayStation, like they have a board they have to answer to of like, why did you put out this product that failed? Or like they can't go and give refunds to people because then they're gonna have to explain to their board why they invested all this time and money into a product that didn't return and then they had to have a big public apology and give a bunch of like that's just not a thing that PlayStation is ever going to do. And like criticize them all you want. A company of that size cannot operate that way. Like it just doesn't, right? Once you're a publicly traded corporation like that, the rules for how you operate and like what's viable versus non-viable, they change. And we can talk about the ethics and the like how gross that is till we're long in the face. It's not going to change the market reality of when you're a major company like that. Your products need to hit a certain metric of success, or they are a failure. It's not whether or not they're looked at as a failure. It did fail. It didn't sell as much as they thought it was going to. They had projected targets for what it needed to make to be viable, and it didn't hit them. So
mhm.
what happens now, right? It's like, do you double down on something that's busted and, so you can
I mean,
save
they could
face?
potentially fix it if they reduce the price, if they
I
get
I
in
mean,
there with additional, like, game support.
That's
I
that's
don't
the thing
know.
though, Steve, is like you say that, right? And like maybe you're right, but take it back to Gabe's comment in 2017. It's a salient point and it's something that I agree with. I think even if you cut the price of PSVR 2 in half, does that mean people run out and buy it? No, cuz why would they? VR is not mainstream like that. It is not appealing to the average player in the way that it needs to be
Yeah.
for it to be a mass market product, period. And, I think you're right that the argument to be made for why that isn't the case is because at the end of the day, the experiences to be had there are not rewarding or attractive enough to the vast majority of players to justify investing the money. But I think even more than that, it's the time. Because I'll tell you, for me, it's anecdotal, but me personally, right? The reason I got out of VR, I sold my headset and I was like, I'm never going to buy another VR headset, or at least I'm not going to buy one at any time in the next several gaming generations, is because forget money, right? I had expendable income. I bought the VR set, I owned it at that point. What I don't have, what is not expendable, is time. And I have not played a single game in VR that is as good as a quote unquote regular video game. And that's the bottom line. I totally agree with Gabe. Is you could give me a VR headset for free, I wouldn't use it because I don't want to play any of the games there because they're not that fun. And maybe that's a controversial opinion, but I think the fact that the market, there's not a single headset that is entertained a significant sized user base proves my point that like, or proves Gabe's point, right? Is that like, I think there is a desire problem with VR so much more than any of these other things. And like to take it back to the PlayStation bit of it, right? Like for Sony to decide that they're going to double down on this thing and commit to it, they need to invest millions more in marketing the thing. They need to give it time at every state of play and every PlayStation presentation. They need to put however, and we know, right? It costs $200 million to develop one of their AAA games, right? I don't know what the costs on that are for VR. Say it's the same, say it's a little bit cheaper. I don't know. Let's say it's half. Let's say it costs a hundred
The
thousand.
thing is though, like how many copies have you got to sell in order to reach that profit point versus how many people have you even got to sell to with the
Exactly.
VR headset?
Exactly. So you're
They just
telling me
can't.
that for them to make this product viable, they need to continue to throw money in a pit in hopes that it becomes viable. It's not even a guarantee that people will pick it up because I think to Gabe's point, there's just not that excitement for the market. And I think with Valve, they can get away with that because the Steam Deck sold 1 million units and we're like, wow, what a huge success. Like that's huge. They could probably sell 1 million units. They could probably sell 2 million units, right? Like that's believable. And I think if your theory is correct and that this, companion set top box consoleized PC, whatever we're calling this thing that comes with it, or that exists as an option to come with it, if that device is effectively a Steam machine, as you've suggested, that makes the prospect of releasing this VR headset even less risky. Because even if the VR headset doesn't light the world on fire and they prove that the market for VR has moved on and whatever, well, you have this other product that could be a success independent of the VR device. And that works as part of your existing ecosystem
Well,
that speaks
and
to the
plus
Steam Deck owners that you've been courting for the last year.
you're replacing the index, which has already been a good product for you, a
Success.
profitable profit product for you, a success. You're just replacing that with something new. It's another reason for people to buy another headset. You've not only got new people to sell to, you've got people who are already interested in VR, who have already bought into your ecosystem and want to continue to be there. There's huge sections of the VR space that are only on PC and aren't available on console. Things like VR chat, for example, that's never going to come to PlayStation. I don't see them ever allowing that onto their platform.
No, not
You
at
can
all.
play that on PC, and that's where people want to be. That's social VR. And if I can do that without having to have a big PC and be tethered down, and I can move around my room and do what I want with this tiny little box that's in the room, then that seems like a really great solution. And I don't know. I think if you can buy the whole thing for 1,000, it's like $1,000 for the headset, the box, the controllers, a couple of the base stations. Seems like a pretty reasonable price. You got a little PC in your living room, and you've got a headset that's seemingly going to be pretty high spec.
Yeah, I think it sounds like an attractive package, and I think it's one of the few plays for VR in the last couple of years that I think really makes sense to me because it's still focused on the only market that seems to actually give a flying fuck about VR, and that's PC gamers. I
Hmm.
don't, like I feel like the Quest has not proven that there is a mass market non-gamer audience for VR, and the PSVR 2 has shown that I think like that the interest in VR from like the casual market is waning. And like I think if anyone can come out and double down on it and do something that is new and fresh and accessible, I think it is Valve. And I think they have the best chance for success and the best chance to actually stick around and make another headset because I wouldn't be surprised if you get to a point in a couple years where Quest doesn't exist because it's not profitable enough for Facebook anymore, and they just don't want to deal with it, and they spin it off or they liquidate it or whatever, right? And I don't think we'll see a PSVR 3. I just don't. Doesn't make sense.
No, I agree with you. I mean, the Quest has been a success in terms of sales of the headsets. I mean, they sold 20 million of them. That's not an inconsiderate amount.
No, that's
And
good.
the problem
That's a
is,
good install
though,
base for sure.
it's how many people are coming back, how many people are buying games, how many people are continuing to use these devices. And I don't know that many people are because there's not enough software there to grab people. You know, even on the PC, right? We had Half-Life Alyx, but where's the next one? Where's the next Half-Life Alyx? That was meant to be the start of like a VR renaissance, and we never really saw
Nope.
anything else, you know?
And I mean, you know what, man? This is and you know, we're circling the drain on this at this point, so we'll we'll wrap it up here after this. But if you have a final point, you can put the period on it. Um, I think that comes back to the point I was just making about PlayStation, where like for VR to grow, VR games need to advance. And for VR games to advance and become actual must play experiences that can stand toe to toe in a game of the year discussion with an Elden Ring or you know, a Baldur's Gate or a Zelda or Starfield or something like that. Like they have to be on that level and they're just not. And for them to get there, we need to have companies that are willing to invest a ton of money not only in the R&D of the hardware but of the software and of the development. And the reality of that is it's non-viable. If you're not a company that's owned by Quest or you don't have an angel investor, it makes no sense for you to release a VR game as a commercial product because you will spend the same amount of time and effort, if not more, that you would developing a traditional game, and you'll have, you know, a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the amount of players that you can sell it to. And during a recession, during a time where game development is only getting more expensive, why would you bet the future of your studio or of your career on a VR game if not strictly for the love of the game or because you have a huge budget to play with because, you know, Zuck is cashing your checks?
Hey, it's not Zuck these days. It's ByteDance, you know. Pico is where it's at apparently.
Sure.
And you know, when the TikTok company has money to spend and they're checking it in VR, the summer's gonna come out at some point.
Maybe,
We'll see.
maybe. But again, it's like I think it's something that like you've got to be willing to make that massive investment into. And we've talked about a lot about why big companies are risk averse and like VR is inherently risky. And it's something that you need to be like PlayStation was back with PSVR 1, where I remember Shuhei Yoshida was going around saying, we look at this the same way we looked at PS1. Like we're getting in on a market. We're going to be here for decades and like it's going to take time and we're building a market. Like that's how you got to look at it. And you got to be comfortable with the idea that you're not going to make money or that you're going to have these challenges for years, right? With the
Yeah.
promise that eventually VR is going to be, or AR is going to be a significant portion of the way that we interact with content or media or the world. And I'm not convinced. I'm not. Doesn't seem like people want that as much as I think
Who
marketers
knows?
want us to want it.
Maybe a really light headset that's wireless that connects to something that already plays games that you're interested in, and it's a companion thing. And if they can get the price down to $200-300 for the headset, maybe there's a reason. Maybe people go, you know what, this is a toy, and I want something else to
Yeah,
play, and maybe I want to do fitness in VR, which is a really compelling use case. And I think there's potentially a route in there. We'll
I,
just have to wait and see.
I think you're right. But I feel like for that to really be viable, the VR headset needs to get to the same place as like the tablet, right? Where it's a device where you're initially like, what do I need this for? Anything I can do on a tablet, I could do on a phone or I could do on a laptop, right? Like, but it's the quality of life of it. It's the microwave equation, right? Nobody actually needs a microwave. Everything a microwave you can do can be done by another device, but it's convenient and it's fast and it's
Look, we have
affordable.
devices that just boil water. I bought you one, you know?
You
Like,
did.
it's very convenient to just put water in something and push a button, and it boils it for me, and I don't need to do anything else, and it's done in minutes, and I don't have to look at it and be safe, you know?
Yeah.
There's use for single-use devices.
Sure, but I don't VR hasn't proven what that is yet because the
No.
VR specific use cases are primitive and the non-VR specific use cases suck. Like, they're not as enjoyable as just like, do you want like, who wants a screen on their face? Really?
Well, imagine you've mentioned that you wouldn't mind a screen on your face, but it was in a different context. It was those glasses that you put on your face, and you got the screen there, and you can plug it into your Steam Deck, and you can kind of see a big screen of what you're playing on your Steam Deck or your Switch or whatever.
Yeah.
If it can get to the point where it's really light on your face and you're seeing like the games that you're gonna be playing anyway, but you can use it in bed and not have to disturb your partner, and you can have like a big screen in front of your face. Like that's a use case I think a lot of people would want.
Yeah, I could see that. We'll see,
But
though.
those products already exist. Maybe
A
wireless
and
products
again,
don't.
like,
I don't know.
they exist, but it's like they're not popular,
They're
and
very niche. Yeah, they're
yeah.
very niche.
So it's like that I don't know, like, do people even really want that shit? I don't know. I don't know. I don't think the market has proven that people want it. And there are way dumber things that have ended up coming out and going over that it's like the market speaks when it comes to consumer products, right? Like, if people were dying to get VR, it would be more popular, even if it's expensive.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I'm interested to see what Valve has to offer because with the Steam Deck, they proved that they can innovate and do things that, um, you know, that change your mind, right? And like prove the value of something, right? Like they basically created this handheld PC market. So I'm totally down to see them prove me wrong again. If anyone can do it,
I
it's
hope
them.
so. I'd like to see like, yeah, oh, you know what? I really want to play this one game in VR now, and I think I'm gonna do it because I could see that happening.
I would love I think for me, the thing that will make me a believer again is if I can get to the end of a year and one of the top 10 games in my game of the year is a VR exclusive experience. That's when I think you've proven to me that VR is viable.
The problem is though, I think you'd already have to have the VR set up in order for you to try the game, in order for
Yeah.
you to know that it's going to be one of your top 10.
Yep.
Because I don't think you would go out of your way, even if everyone's telling you this is a 10 out of 10 game, compete, you're going to love this game, it's 100% for you, it's perfect, it's Pokemon mixed with Spider Man, and it's everything that you love, and you're going to want to play it. People, you'd still be like, oh, yeah, but it's VR, I don't want to play it.
Yeah, and I'd have to be convinced, you
Yeah.
know, which I mean can be done. So win me over, Val. Think about it. I wasn't sold on the Steam Deck, and then you got one, and I was like, oh, okay, I want one.
Yeah, yeah, and you sold for different reasons than I was, but you
Yeah.
still sold on it.
But exactly, and that's the thing. That's why the Steam Deck is a viable product, right? And
Yeah.
that's why I think this set box is a viable product because it's like I can come up with a bunch of reasons why you would use it or how you would use it, and I just think the jury's still out for me on whether VR is really capable of delivering those experiences to people at a reasonable enough price point that everyone will own one in the same way everyone owns a television.
Oh god, yeah, imagine that, not even in a television. I also can't imagine not owning a games console, and there are people that don't own one, so that's bizarre to me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just a totally different lifestyle.
Yeah. I grew up with them, so
Well, we'll leave it there for today. This conversation went to some interesting places. I'm interested to hear what y'all at home think. Like, are you interested in this deckard? Are you interested in the idea of this like set top box being a companion? Would you buy into something like that, or do you see yourself, wanting it to connect to your existing rig and like going the wireless card route and that kind of thing, or like a dongle? Um, I'm interested to hear because I know the most interesting thing about our audience on this show is how different everybody's use cases are, right?
yeah.
Because so many PC gamers that never touch a console, and then there's a ton of us that have decks and aren't on PC, and so I'm interested to see like of our audience what segments this device potentially speaks to. Could you see yourself buying into something like this and needing another portal for your Steam library? I'm interested. So make sure you let us know. Flipscreen.games. That's a website. Come track us down however you choose to. There's a bunch of ways to get involved. You can write into the show at questions@flipscreen.games. You can come join the Discord and keep the conversation rolling between episodes. Or you want to get some more content, flipscreen.games. Go click on some of the other shows. Check out our sister shows, Nintendo Noise, and the Flip Screen Games podcast, where we talk about stuff not relating to Steam, Steam Deck, and PC gaming. And yeah, just go over there and click on some stuff. Helps us out a lot. And of course, if you want to go above and beyond to show your support, we've got a Patreon. We've got all those places. Go and click on some stuff. Follow us however you choose to get involved or show your support. We greatly appreciate you tuning in to another episode of the Steam Deck podcast. For the crew, I've been Pete. He's been Steve. We'll see you next week.